Risk management is never exciting for business owners, right? They look at it as a cost, when it comes to insurances. And
whether you on the outside of your market trying to tap back in, or just need a little help to find a way to gain some traction again, you need some market reconnection. We got the answers to your questions. No second thoughts or second guessing. You need some market reconnection.
Back with another freshly squeezed episode, and today I'm really excited for my guest who is joining me, and we'll talk more about on the business side of things, which I'm personally very excited about, and hope you guys will get some value out of this. And without further ado, today I am joined by Carlson. How's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on your show. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, man. It's a absolute pleasure. I know we chatted a bit previously, and you dropped some knowledge bombs there that I think a lot of small business owners, small to medium-sized business owners, really don't know about. And I'm looking forward to peeling back some of that information that we kind of spoke to briefly. But before we do that, let's start off with quickly just introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how'd you get into what you're doing today?
Yeah, so in risk management for business owners, I've been doing it for almost 30 years now. I mean, it's probably been my most it's been really rewarding the last several years. Up until that point, it's risk management is never exciting for business owners, right? They look at it as a cost, when it comes to insurances and all that good stuff. But the reality is, I think we got clients out there, business owners, that take a lot of risk to do what they do, and a lot of times insurance, traditional insurances fall short. And that really became glaring back in '08 when the Great Recession hit, and I saw a lot of business owners, pillars of the community, risk takers, guys that had a dream and ran with it, and really created jobs in their community, and small to middle market business owners, like you were saying. And unfortunately, a lot of them, found themselves going out of business. And then you look at big businesses, sometimes they don't care what's going on. They win and lose. They win on both sides of the ledger a lot of times. And so, I just feel like there had to be a smarter, better way to run a business. And this is where I was introduced to the concept of what we do today. And what we're going to be talking about is really a very little known tax code called 831B. Our website's 831B.com, but 831B is still different than the 401k, right? It's just where you find it in the tax code. But really what happened back in 1986, the insurance industry was non-renewing a lot of business owners. There was hardening of the market, nothing like we've seen. You go back to 86, there was stagflation, interest rates were super high, claims, insurance companies weren't nearly as regulated as they were today. And two, it's, the information age hasn't hit yet, right? So, I mean, we're just getting ready to hit that in the early 90s. But really, small business found themselves not being able to insure their traditional insurances, not alone risk they couldn't transfer, stuff they were self-insuring for. And so Congress got together and said, hey, we're going to create a tax code called 831B that allows small to middle market business owners to take a deduction at the operating company level, no different than traditional insurances, but they're going to dump it into this 831B plan, no different, again, 401k, 831B, and then we're going to be able, that 831B does not pick that up as income, and now you're able to build reserves and surplus. Now, truth be told, it was originally written for small to middle market business owners, who gravitated to it first were Fortune 500 companies, big companies. They're already in self-insuring risk. I mean, Zurich's not going to sell Microsoft product liability risk, right? So they're already taking these risks on themselves. They just saw a much more tax preferential treatment on it, and they were really the first ones to the market. Now you're talking almost 40 years now. We got into business after '08, grew our, came up with the concept of strategic risk alternatives, 831B.com, really started building out our product line, crafting our message. And it came around 2012, 2013. We started getting some really traction in the marketplace. And now we've got over 200 advisors around the country that represent our products. And really it's talking to business owners, talking about risk. And again, these are a ton of risk out there that, we think traditional insurance companies do a very good job when it comes to tangible assets of the business, meaning the buildings, the vehicles, things that you can get a loan on, right? Essentially. But most business owners really value the intangible assets of their business: reputation, intellectual properties, contracts, where their brand sits within their community, the trusts and that the consumers put into that brand. That's what really business owners value. And traditional insurance carriers fall down on that. They just don't like the intangible asset coverages. No different than banks like to loan money on them either, right? So that's where really kind of we plug in and really help business owners. That, I make it very clear to businesses, I don't here to increase or decrease the risk you currently have. We're just going to take the risk you can't transfer traditionally through insurances and make it more manageable for you, mitigate that risk. And that's really deferring taxable income, building up your own reserves, and creating your own surplus. And so when I say an 831B plan, just know that the box is a C corp, and it has to look and feel like an insurance company. That's what we, as their administrator, no different than a 401k administrator, we manage that box. We manage that 831B plan. We make sure they follow the 4-part test. I mean, there's rules and regulations of this thing, obviously, and that's our job. And that's where we come in and play with the business owners. And believe me, there's, and then of course, not only did we have the Great Recession, but 12 years later, COVID hit. And that's really where I think a lot of business owners came to realize that their traditional insurance fell down in a lot of ways. I mean, if you didn't have a direct loss on your property, there was no coverage. Indirect losses specifically state you're excluded. So, we've got a couple of those going on right now too, Ivan, where, you look at I think there's a tire fire going on right now somewhere in the Midwest where over 2,000 people got evacuated from a small town yesterday, and all those businesses had to shut down. Well, there's no business interruption for that. Because there's no direct loss on that property. So therefore it's not going to be covered. So there's all sorts of things that go into it. And then you get into the climate changes, whether you believe in war, it doesn't matter. We all know that we're living in areas that are more prone to catastrophic losses due to weather, and insurance carriers are going to keep limiting coverages they have to. So these are all things that we're kind of plugging in with business owners all over the country. And I think it resonates very well for the right client, and we don't pull any punches. This is just another tool in the toolbox. But for the right client, it's a fantastic tool.
Sure. Wow. That was a wealth of information there. I appreciate you alluding to that. It definitely speaks great lengths to your knowledge and expertise in this area. And I actually want to expand upon that a little bit more, because you said something in the beginning that I think, small business owners and mid-sized business owners don't realize, which is, in the beginning, you said the Fortune companies, really jumped on this opportunity because they saw it as another way to basically help mitigate certain type of risk that the traditional insurance companies would not otherwise cover. But now what you're doing is you're actually helping small to medium-sized businesses take advantage of this program. Having said that, let's start with talking about what are some ways to be able to depict certain types of risks that the traditional insurance companies would not cover. So if you, like a small business owner like myself, right, you talked about contracts and all these other things. So what are some ways that you help small to mid-sized businesses identify those types of risks?
Yeah. So, I mean, every industry has its own unique risks that they can't transfer. A good example, and I think it hits a lot of people last 2 to 3 years, has been supply chain risk.
Yeah.
We've got a scenario where we had a denim provider to provide a denim all over a very high in jean manufacturer, and they had to get denim out of certain parts of the world. Well, and this was out of China. This is during COVID. Well, the contracts were signed; they were dated. So, price of the denim was X. We bid the work. We got the work. They go back and get the denim now. COVID took hold, and now they can't even get it. So the problem is when you have that supply chain risk, and you got a contract on the other end, and the dollar's been set. Now to procure that product, it's going to cost you more money. But you can't go back to the end user on that, because you signed the contract. The contract's the contract, right? Yeah. And so now you got to pay more for that product that you unforeseen, and now you got to and you got to deliver on the product. So we even had to put airfare in order to meet the deadlines. He had to put on air freight, where normally it got shipped by containers. So that's just one example, but I can tell you this. I've dealt with business owners all over the country. Supply chain risk is real. Now, traditional insurance companies will not cover that. It's just not going to be a covered event for them because it's too catastrophic. It's too unknown. It's hard to underwrite. I mean, it's all of those things. But believe me, supply chain risk, and for your listeners, they know it's a real risk to them, and it's proven itself the last couple of years. So I think just recently, that's a big one. When you look at cyber today, it's crazy. I go to a lot of different cyber conferences, and in the beginning, when data was like, oh, everybody's got to grab data. The more data you grab, the better. You're going to know more about your client. You're going to have all this. Well, now they consider data to be toxic, meaning if you hold that data, you have a responsibility for that data. And now it opens itself to cyber, and believe me, those guys are getting very crafty. Insurance industries have to limit coverages on their cyber exposures because somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of cyber claims go unreported. I should say cyber incidents, because if they were claimed, it was covered under insurance. So when they have those types of statistics, it scares the living day out of traditional insurance carriers because they're not pricing their product correctly. Because if all those claims were being reported, then they can price it correctly, right? No different than all the auto claims are being reported. Well, now we can really dial in on what the premium should be. So they're going to limit the coverages and stuff like that. So those are things that traditional, like, in 86, when this code was passed, these things weren't even thought about. But now you fast forward 40 years. I mean, the world's gotten so complex. And brand coverage, brand damage. Think about brand today. Think about how long and hard it takes to build your reputation in the community, but it literally takes seconds to destroy. Whether it was true or not, it won't be mattered. I mean, if something got posted on Facebook, it's just, we can go on and on. I mean, I can get really geeked out here on the risk, but I think sitting down with a business owner to show, and a lot of times they have their own nightmare stories, right? I mean, when I was selling traditional insurances back in 08, prior to 08, I could tell you, Ivan, how many times I told clients, hey, don't turn that in, and here's what's going to happen, or hey, it's not going to be covered, and here's why. I mean, it happens every day, and business owners get super frustrated with that, which I get. You pay insurance, and then now you're not using it, right? Or you can't use it, or it's not going to cover what you really wanted it to cover. And those are things that we can, absolutely identify with business owners from. If you've been in business long enough, everybody's experienced everything I've just mentioned. So
there were a couple of things that you mentioned that I think a lot of small business owners, specifically, I'd say, 1 to probably 15 million, mark roughly, that they don't realize is that they're so caught up in, the daily grind of trying to build their business, and specifically in trying to build their brand, which you mentioned. And you're absolutely right, 100%, that it takes 3 seconds for someone to say something on social media that can heavily backfire. And the next thing you know is you've got this ginormous risk that you have to deal with that goes back to insurance. Well, what most people don't realize, look at myself as a consumer, right? Auto insurance, life insurance. I mean, let's face it. How often do you actually use it? Unless you're a terrible
hopefully
driver.
Life insurance you don't use, but
Exactly. So it's a money pit for traditional insurance companies, because they've realized that, risk costs money, but you're actually paying for a safety net, really, is what you're paying. So what I'm hearing you say is 831B comes in is that, it helps fill that void, basically, the traditional insurance companies do not want to deal with, because let's face it, for one, it's not profitable for them. It'll be a huge financial loss if they said, like you were talking about the scenario with, I'm in the Midwest, by the way, you were talking about that town that got burnt down. Now these businesses have to close, and none of this is going to be covered. So all these small businesses are going to be like, oh shit, what am I going to do? I just lost 3, 4, 5, 2 weeks, however much time of business.
And the rent doesn't stop. The payroll doesn't stop.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I mean, that COVID happened that way, right? When you deemed to be not a non-essential anymore. I mean, that had to be a great feeling, right? You're not an essential business anymore. Well, that doesn't mean your bill stopped. And so, those are things that, and I appreciate some of the comments you've made. Absolutely. And the thing about, here's what I would say, Ivan. Mm-hmm. You've never had an incentive to save money in business. You've had a ton of incentive to spend money. And that gets back to 08, right? I mean, everybody knew, everybody they were doing well financially. Look at the contractors; they were just killing it, right? I mean, everybody was making money if you're a contractor.
Right.
And real estate was through the roof, interest rates were low. I mean, it was easy to get loans and all that fun stuff. Those guys were killing it. Well, they were buying more equipment than I had guys buying equipment, asking me to insure it, and they didn't even know if they were going to use it next year. But they hate paying taxes, so their accountant told them to go buy more equipment. And the problem is they financed it. They didn't pay for it, but they were able to accelerate the complete value of that equipment. Though that's craziness, right? I mean, you're betting next year is going to be better than this year, and those are risks that people don't know. To your point, they don't know the risk they've taken until it's too late, and that's really that's what got me motivated to go into this business. It's like, man, there's got to be a smarter, better way. I don't know if we're making more risk takers. More people willing to run their own business, take an idea, run with it, and take a business and make it profitable.
Right.
That's threading needles, man. I mean, in this day and age, and it's not getting easier. You got to compete with big companies and all the rest. But so to me, it's like, man, can we take these types of tools, bring it down to that small to middle market business owner, make it costly, make it a cost effectiveness for them. I think that's one of the things that we focused on too, by the way. When I first looked at these things, they were so darn expensive. Only Fortune 500 companies could afford to do them. Yep. And now we brought them down. We've taken a rocket ship and made it down to not quite a Yugo, but a little bit above that, maybe a Prius or something. But you know what I mean? It's
a luxury Prius.
But I mean, it's not complicated. And believe me, our competitor, we compete mostly with attorneys in this stuff, and I should mention too that this code has been abused. It's unfortunate, but welcome to the United States. I mean, anytime a bill or law gets passed, somebody sitting around somewhere says, "Oh, well, no, actually, we can interpret it this way and go do it this way." So,
and then you have the plethora of social media that literally just latches on that, like, "Oh, they abused it. That means it doesn't work." That's exactly what it sounds like. What happened in the beginning?
No, it's exactly what happened. In fact, they were doing it for estate tax purposes back in 2009, 2008, 2010, because back then, I mean, it was so low that there was a lot of people willing to take the risk, and they abused it because they had no intention of risk management. They had all the intentions for estate tax planning, and got to hand it to estate tax attorneys. They were smart. They ran with it, and however, it came back to bite several clients in the butt because they didn't set it up for the right reasons. So when today's conversation is completely different than when I first started. We're talking about financial risk when we started. Hey, we got to make this thing smarter, better, become your own bank down the road. Get away from. Look at what banks were doing, right? I mean, banks were foreclosing on people. I mean, covenants alone started to mean things during the Great Recession. And anybody that lived through that has that memory of that pit in their stomach, like, man, am I going to be able to cover my loans? Am I going to be able to keep my business afloat? I mean, we didn't have PPP. We didn't have look what now big companies got built out during 08 and 09 and all that fun stuff. And I think COVID obviously helped small business out. But, one of the things I would like to talk about too, it's like, well, what's plan B? Our president right now is saying, hey, there's going to be another pandemic. Where's the money going to come from? I mean,
exactly.
One of the things that we did, one of the things I think that COVID showed us was, there's got to be a plan here. It seemed like a little bit of ad hocing going on. Seemed like they gave out the money and they made up the rules later. I can tell you this. I mean, the Secret Service is estimating over $100 billion just went missing during the COVID and the PPP.
Went missing.
Yeah, right. It's
missing. Well, a couple of things I want to expand upon that you were talking about, because as you were talking about the affordability of 831B, there's two really important things there that I wanted to mention for listeners and viewers. First of all, as a small business owner, there's really two reasons why you look at something and you either say it's too costly, or two, I don't need it, or I'm not going to see value in it. And if it's too costly, it's because you're uneducated on how it's going to help you. So you were talking about the cost effectiveness of how in the beginning, I mean, 831B was, affordable by Fortune companies. They really didn't need it because they already had insurance. They just wanted like that safety blanket to say that, well, if we fall through the first layer, we got a second layer that can catch us underneath. That was really what that was, as a safety net. But what I like that you talked about, and I want to expand more upon this actually, that small businesses can now take advantage of this, because when shit hits the fan, and you exactly said that a second ago, this recession in 2023, right? How long is it going to last? As a small business owner, what protection do you have? And I think in part why most small businesses fail in the first 5 years is because they don't focus enough on risk management. They just don't take that into consideration, because they get so caught up in the grind of, I want to build my business. I want to build my brand. I want to get cash flow, money, 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 sales quota, this. And then you're like, oh shit, like this could crumble overnight because I don't have any protection. Having said that, I want to talk more about that protection, the affordability, and what that looks like. And maybe you can share more about, as a small business owner, what are some things, some ways that you guys specifically help small businesses, and kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things, fees should never kill a deal.
Right.
And that's really where, we focus on. I mean, I've got some practices, everybody asks me, what's the minimum to make this thing work every year? And of course, every state's different, and depending on your
Right.
level taxes. And we're talking about the arbitrage of things, right? Where does it make sense? Where does it costly? And, that number used to be a lot higher. I would say right now, and it's about $80,000 a year to really put into this type of a plan. If you say, hey, next year I'm going to close this thing down and never do it again. I tell clients, when they get into doing this is a long-term strategy. Now there'll be years that you can't do it. Recession's a good example of that. Just economically, it's not feasible. Okay, well, the plan's not going to kill you if you do that. You got to pay. There's some maintenance fees that go into it, but it's all taken out of the 831B plan. So we were very conscious of the affordability to, we got guys that will do $30,000 a year, and it's really because, just because they're smaller in structure, right? They're doing maybe $1 million in revenue or less. We've got great examples. Content providers, right? The content providers on YouTube's, and they monetized and everything else. Those guys have no insurance, so they have no professional liability. I mean, they're on their own, right? And of course, you talk about brand protection, right? So anyway, but we've always kind of been conscious of that, and I think that's one of the things that here's the thing, man. We believe this will become a normal business practice. There's some things that got to get cleaned up on it, and we're going to get there, because I believe the only way we're going to really weather the storms in the future is business owners relying on themselves. No different than they relied on themselves. They didn't go out and get a loan right away, right? They had to scratch. They had to put some of their own sweat equity in, own their own money and everything else. And again, if you turn a business into a profit, you took a ton of risk to get there. And maybe you used banks, maybe you didn't, maybe you had bad experience with banks and all that other fun stuff. But the reality is this thing gives you the ability to be more self-reliant. And I think we as business owners and risk takers, who do you want to rely on? Do you want to rely on yourself, or maybe another time the government says, hey, you're not essential anywhere, we're going to force you to shut down, and here's some PPP money, or here's employee credit retention money. None of us that did that program, that was a bit of a bite of an apple, right? I mean, we're now relying on the government to keep our business open. That didn't sit well with a lot of people. And if it didn't sit well with you then, what are you doing differently about it today? And I'm telling you right now, in 831, you at least owe it to the employees you help support, the business you run, the risk you took to look into these types of tools. It doesn't matter if you can't afford to do it today or it doesn't make sense for you today. Hopefully as your business grows, I guarantee you it will make sense to you. Our affordability goes in the road. And again, it's awareness, right? It's education. To your point, you got to understand what's going on. And God bless business owners, right? I mean, they work on their business or in their business all day long. This is definitely a work on it concept. And that's really where they got to take themselves back a little bit, and hey, God bless them. I'm all about risk taking, but man, if you could just mitigate a little bit of it off to the side. And I say this all the time, not only is that good risk management, it's just good business.
Something that you said that I read, this is your mission statement of your company, that at SRA, we believe small and mid-sized businesses are the lifeblood of the American economy. Do you know how many people cannot actually fathom that? Because I think in American society, speaking from a cultural differentiation, but I'm Bulgarian, naturalized American citizen, 25 years ago now. But speaking from a cultural aspect, particularly that I think in American society, most people have developed this gravitation towards big brands, right? So like Nike or Pepsi or Coca-Cola. And we were kind of taught, like, through generations even, to be attracted to those brands. But what people don't understand is that 60% or some crazy percentage of the US economy is really driven by small business, because that's where job creation comes from. So now here we are talking about risk management, right? And I'm in the marketing space, and you were talking about content creators. I was thinking like the Mr. Beast of the world, which he's probably one of the only exceptions because he's got piles of cash. And last I heard, he was offered billions of dollars for his YouTube channel that he turned down. But if you're not Mr. Beast, which is most people, you don't really have any additional risk management. And guess what? If you catch yourself, and at least once per year, every small business owner gets caught with their pants down. They just do. It's the inevitability of running a business.
Yeah.
It's just life, right? So what then? So let's talk a little bit about some of the specific industries that maybe you can share about that you guys have helped from a risk management standpoint. What are some things that you've learned?
Well, I could look at OnlyFans.
Yeah. Oh.
You talk about political risk,
right?
Reputation risk,
right?
And hey, if you're making, I don't care if you're making $5,000 a month off of your content.
Yeah.
You get used to those. It absorbs into your lifestyle, right? Now, if you're making a couple 100,000, you hopefully you're managing that. But that all that, you got it from that spectrum, right? Again, these things were not around back in 1986 when this code was being kicked around. But today, the amount of risk people are taking and how they're making their livelihood is really so much at the whim. And how do you not get used to that revenue? How do you not get used to those types of things? And so for us, it's like, man, you guys are, again, ton of risk. How do we manage it more effectively? And that's really, so I would say that's, obviously any content provider out there today is really running on their own. If you're doing any kind of unique consulting today, professional liability insurance has got so many holes in it today. It's a piece of paper you have to provide to somebody that maybe requires it as part of your contract you sign with. But the reality is it's going to do very little for you in the event you get sued personally because you consulted on something and it went sideways. So these are, again, I don't want to, believe me, I could pretty much scare the hell out of anybody when I start talking about what industry they're in.
Yeah.
And it's only because I've been doing this for so long. I've lived it, right? I've seen it. I've had those calls in the middle of the night where somebody, seriously in an auto accident, it was a fatality, or they lost their house, and I've had doctors that were sued because the patient died on the table, and now they're being prosecuted out in the public. And I mean, I can go on and on about how all these things. And by the way, there was no coverage for that, right? So we had the brand coverage for him, and we're able to fight the fight with him a little bit on making sure we recover his good name and blah blah blah. But so there's just a ton of different industries out there. I would tell you this. There's no industry that we can't help. And I'm always truly fascinated by how people do make their living. That's one of the fun things about this country, right? You're like, you're doing what? And how did you come up with that idea? It's just so fun to work with people like that. And you probably have seen that, right? It's like, we're dealing with some people right now that they went, what's the oh my gosh, I'm gonna get made fun of. I couldn't remember that. When they went live, right? The viewership went through the roof, millions of views, right? Viral. They went viral.
Oh, viral, yeah. First
they're
of all,
monetizing that now, and I'm telling you what, overnight, the revenue is nuts. And it's like, you guys are so out in the wind. You don't know if you've taken somebody else's intellectual property yet, because now you're going to bring attention to yourself, or you're going to have lawsuits flying at you. I mean, it's a complicated world.
Well, one of the biggest things here, and I've learned this also the hard way, as a fellow entrepreneur and a business owner. Luckily, I've, coming from an immigrant background, I've been raised by ethical parents who have learned a lot of hard things. Because I mean, we came from a country that was formerly communist. We were
Yeah.
poor. I mean, we rode around in a vehicle that could barely, max out at 60 kilometers. That thing started shaking like crazy. So I came from humble beginnings. What you're saying is, in American society, a lot of small to medium-sized businesses simply do not pay due diligence in recognizing the importance around education when it comes to risk management. Because it's one of two things: my business is not doing well, I can't afford this, or my business is doing great, I got money in the bank, all is good, right? I can pay for the kids, I can pay my car payment, my mortgage, all that. I can pay my employees and payroll and blah, blah, blah. But you know what? It's not always going to be rainbows and unicorns. And that's when this comes into play. And so, which is why I'm such a big proponent for education and awareness, because you can never have enough of it, especially with risk management, because there's so much that small and medium-sized business owners are incoherent about. And that's what it sounds like you do a lot of, right?
Oh yeah, we're always educating. I mean, that's why we love being on platforms such as yourself, is because I mean, the more we can educate, or again, awareness is education.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
The more you're educated, the more you become aware of things, the better you can make, better options you can have, better decisions you can make. That's
Yep.
the bottom line,
Yep.
right? And that's really where we're at. I mean, again, we're driving hard forward to make this a normal business practice, because I think every business, every successful enterprise needs to look at this tool. And I think with time, it will be no different than the 401ks become a normal business practice, right? So
Yeah.
that's what our
Yeah.
first and foremost, that's our driver, right? And that's what drives us every day to go out and do. And so again, I really appreciate being on your platform, because this is going to help for the right client. It's going to resonate because they've never heard of this before. It's unfortunate, but they've never heard of this before.
One thing you said, not to abruptly interject, because this is really key. You said, before we make this a normal business practice. Now, as humans, and even in the business world, as we don't truly acknowledge something as a normal business practice until it becomes mainstream, right? It's like technology, right? So like when the first iPhone came out, which, by the way, I just heard that iPhone 1 sold for like $60,000. Some lady had it in a drawer and she auctioned it off, and somebody paid 60 grand for the first ever iPhone, which is, it's probably about the size of this.
Yeah, right.
It's a lot smaller, because I remember having one of those. So point I'm trying to make is this, that a lot of small businesses don't truly acknowledge the importance of something until it becomes mainstream, or until shit hits the fan, and then they're trying to mitigate risk. But by then, it's kind of like, you don't put the cart before the horse. You got to get yourself set up. And that's what you help small businesses do, is get set up, get educated, know what you're up against, how it's valuable for your business, how it's applicable for different industries and different verticals. Because we talked about content creators a second ago, and you made a really good point, because a lot of these guys don't have insurance. I mean, they're balling in cash, making some of them. I know some guys on Twitter that are YouTubers, they'll make 25 to 50K a month. They'll spend maybe 15 grand on payroll and, services and so forth to help them run their business. But then when you look at risk, it's like, what if somebody sued you today? Like, do you think any of these platforms would cover it? No.
No. And then too, a lot of times, maybe you have to bring action against them. Where's that money all going to come from? I mean, so the dispute resolution side of things are I mean, it's huge. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest things that keep business owners up at night.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a very extremely litigious society. I mean, we've not even hit on that, but we're doing some of those. Now traditional insurances might have a right to defend clause, but when you don't have an insurance policy to begin with, it doesn't really matter, to your point. Yeah. And a lot of those guys, I would say all of those people, really are kind of running without any of that stuff. And that's, again, that's just, slow down. You've gotten here. You've made it. Now, how do I mitigate some of this? And I think you brought up a good point earlier about what you talked about with the peaks and the valleys of business cycles. We could, more than likely, we're going into a recession, right? Yeah. Interest rates are high. That's all going to start to play itself out. And I guarantee you 2 years from now, you're going to want to have a lot of cash sitting around in 2025, hopefully, assuming that we come out of the back end of this thing. Well, again,
Yep.
you know, to take a little bit off the top. This what really got me going, Ivan, is back in '08
Yeah.
when I sit there and watched a business owner have one of these things. He actually had 7 of these plans. And that guy showed up at his competitors and was buying all their equipment at 10 cents on the dollar. And then I went, oh my God, this is what smart money does.
Yeah.
You know, this is how
Yep.
people make money in the troughs, you know, who's still standing. And I say this a lot to business owners, especially when I talk to contractors and general contractors and business owners that have cyclical type cycles. It's like, guys, if you're not doing this, your competitor is. And I promise you, that's putting them in a hell of a lot better competitive position long term than you.
Well, one thing you said, with the recession and having piles of cash, hopefully sitting around in 2 years, that I'm sure you've heard of what's happening with the devaluing of the U.S. dollar and the change in currency, the standardization of currencies on an international level, right? And how China and Russia and Saudi Arabia
Oh
are
yeah.
talking about how, hey, screw you, we're no longer going to standardize the U.S. dollar. We're just going to use our own currency. So what does that do to the U.S. dollar? It tanks it very fast, right?
It could be super scary on that
Yeah.
end, in my opinion. I mean, you know, the thing about now you're talking about global political economics, right? Where
Yep.
you know it's completely out of your control as a small to middle market business owner, and from that big business
Right.
too. But you know, the reality though is it just speaks to the risk everybody's taking. I mean, and you're retaining that risk, right? If you're retaining that, well, there's a better way to manage that risk, and that's utilizing
Yeah.
an 831B. That's you know, and I think we got some really good educational videos, you know, that would help. But like I said, we have over 200 advisors around the country. If somebody's, you know, wants to reach out, and we can absolutely plug other people in the area. We've got a ton of
Yeah.
referrals, references. Um, you know, again, it's, you know, if you're doing well, it's just good risk management, and it's good business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that being said, if any small to medium sized business, wants to engage with you, like what's the most simple, dummy proof way to, get more information, get engaged and see if, this is the right timing for them.
Yeah, you know, I would start at our website. 831b.com is our
Okay.
website. And from there, you know, there's a lot of videos, there's a lot of references, educational stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, you know, going back to the abuses, this thing's been abused. So if you Google the code, obviously there's been some,
Yeah.
you know, the IRS likes to beat their chest on some cases they won, but truth be told, there were really bad facts and they cherry picked the
Yeah.
cases. I think
Yeah.
there's over 1,000 cases pending, but they won't go to
Sure.
court with them because they're worried about losing a court case, right? So, that being said, you know, this is a
Yeah.
code. The Path Act, there were some changes made in the Path Act that brought this code up to current situations where it got rid of the state tax plays and stuff like that. But, you know, this code's going to be around for a long time. It's going to continue to be around. Big business has been using it for a very long time. We're going to get some clarity on some things. And, you know, meanwhile, you know, nobody's going to run and help you. And hey, bottom line is, man, I don't know if we can do the PP thing again. I don't know if we can do the employer credit retention thing again. I still think there's, you know, that the Simi Valley Bank, in my opinion, failed because of the PPP and the employer credit retention. All that free money that went out, interest rates had to rise so fast, so quickly, it put that bank at risk. And so we're still having domino effects going on when you pump out $6 trillion of make-believe money into an economy. I don't think it's shown its ugly head yet. A lot of things that could have potentially happened because of that. Inflation obviously is the one that makes sense. But now with this inflation, the interest rates, it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably keep going with this conversation. First, I want to say thank you so much for this massive amount of information that you shared, because I think personally, every listener, every viewer that's an entrepreneur, small to medium-sized business owner, they should all absolutely 100% take advantage of all this information that you've shared. I really want to thank you for that. And then last but not least, I know you mentioned your website, but is there any other way to connect with you, or is just the website the primary way to connect
The website, they're going to be able to plug us in right to there. I mean, they're going to find us on a lot of videos. We got, like I said, our biggest thing is videos, just educating clients. I mean, the website would be, and I say 831b.com because, you know, we're one of the ones that got that domain name. You know, we had to, So,
Absolutely.
and I think it's an easy one to remember. And I really just want clients to go and, hey, business owners take enough risk. If we can help mitigate that risk, and the business owners gravitate to it, everybody's going to win.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Once again, it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Ivan. Appreciate you.
Whether you on the outside of your market trying to tap back in, or just need a little help to find a way to gain some traction again, you need some market reconnection. We got the answers to your questions. No second thoughts or second guessing. You need some market reconnection.